The MBCPD believes that to be successful, an advocacy group must use all the colors in their box of crayons in order to get a clear and accurate picture. And this is why we represent all disabilities, visible, invisible, and mental health. For the next few weeks, we will continue to post information on different disabilities, whether they are visible, whether they are hidden, or mental health, to help the general public and even persons with disabilities have a greater understanding of all the disabilities and barriers out there. This is week 3 in review of Know My Disability. What is Down syndrome? The medical explanation lists it as a genetic disorder caused when abnormal cell divisions result in extra, full, or partial copy of chromosome 21. And that extra genetic material causes developmental changes and physical features that are well associated with Down syndrome. It is probably one of the most common and visible chromosomal disorders around. Down's varies in severity among individuals, causing lifelong intellectual disabilities as well as developmental delays. It also commonly causes other medical abnormalities, including heart and gastrointestinal disorders, immune disorders, sleep apnea, obesity, spinal problems, leukemia, dementia, and more. A better understanding of Down syndrome and early intervention can greatly increase the quality of life for children and adults with the disorder and help them live fulfilling lives. There is no cure for Down syndrome. What is post-traumatic stress disorder? Complex PTSD. Many have heard of PTSD, so that post-traumatic stress disorder, but may not have heard of complex PTSD. So a person who has complex PTSD may experience symptoms in addition to those that characterize PTSD. Common symptoms of PTSD and complex PTSD include avoiding situations that remind them of the trauma, dizziness, nausea when remembering the trauma, hyperarousal, the belief that the world is a dangerous place, a loss of trust in self or others, and difficulty sleeping and concentration. There is no cure for PTSD or complex PTSD, but the underlying trauma can attempt to be treated, which will be ongoing for life. There are also many coping behaviors. Persons with PTSD and complex PTSD may exhibit certain behaviors in an attempt to manage their symptoms. Examples of these behaviors include misusing alcohol or drugs, avoiding unpleasant situations by becoming people pleasers, lashing out at minor criticisms or self-harm. These can develop as a way to deal with or to try and forget about the original trauma and the resulting syndromes. Friends and families of people with complex PTSD should be aware of these behaviors and how they may represent coping mechanisms. PTSD is severe. Complex PTSD is even more severe and traumatic, and the treatment that many persons with disabilities receive add a form of PTSD onto our conditions. What is Parkinson's disease? Parkinson's disease in the last decade or so has been a little more commonly spoken about due to some more famous people who have developed it, such as Michael J. Fox and Muhammad Ali. It is a progressive disorder that affects the nervous system and parts of the body controlled by the nerves. Symptoms will often start slowly and may at first be barely noticeable tremors in just one hand. It may also cause some stiffness, some rigid muscles, impaired posture, balance, slowing of movement, and loss of automatic movements. The cause of Parkinson is unknown, but there are factors that appear to play a role, such as genes and environmental triggers. So, for example, ongoing exposures to pesticides and herbicides can slightly increase the rate. And as we've already mentioned, it does not matter how much money or how famous you are. Disabilities affect us all, and anyone can wake up tomorrow with one. This is why it's so important to know our disabilities and understand the barriers that society creates so that together we can break down those barriers, because tomorrow one of the disabilities we're reading about today could be a part of your life. Parkinson's will often start later in life, in the 60s, but not always. Males are more likely to develop Parkinson. When it starts, you'll likely experience some difficulties with thinking, you'll suffer depression, emotional changes, some problems swallowing, chewing, eating, sleep difficulties, bladder problems, and constipation. What can be done? There is no current cure for Parkinson. However, treatments are available to help relieve some of the symptoms and maintain your quality of life. Now, of course, that quality of life will continue to diminish, and eventually the supports will not really help. Supportive therapies, medication, and surgery for some individuals, depending at the stage, etc., can be helpful. You will need regular appointments with your specialist so your condition can be monitored. Disabilities such as Parkinson's are becoming more and more of an issue right now, not for the medical system, because the specialists want to treat and work with their patients, yet there's no time, there's no staff, and they're being pulled in so many different directions. And until we get the medical system fixed, persons with disabilities are going to be the ones that suffer the worst at the hands of the loss of services and treatments, yet again. What is obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD? So OCD is another one of these mostly invisible mental health disabilities, but the symptoms will manifest themselves in visible ways if you're looking. It's a pattern of unwanted thoughts and fears or obsessions that lead you to repetitive behaviors. These compulsion symptoms are repetitive behaviors that you feel driven to perform and can interfere with your daily activities and cause significant distress. Some examples are washing your hands until they're raw, counting things over and over and over, ordering items. If you've ever walked into someone's house with OCD and you put a cup in the wrong spot, that can trigger a huge battle. Fear of dirt. Dousing, you've locked a door or turned off the stove, and they will have to return 2, 3, 4, 5 times to check their door. Intense stress when objects are not properly placed. Thoughts of shouting obscenities into crowds. And it will usually start in your teens, but it can even start in early childhood. Symptoms usually start mild and grow in severity. The obsessions and compulsions can change throughout your life. It is considered a lifelong disability, but some might have mild to moderate symptoms, whereas others are so time-consuming they cannot function. And this is why you cannot say, well, I know somebody with OCD and it doesn't really affect their lives, because how it affects one person's life, the barriers that are put in front of that person can be significantly different to the next person that you meet with OCD. And that would be the same with all disabilities. You cannot look at them as a one-size-fits-all example. Treatments may not result in a cure, but it can help bring some symptoms under control so that they don't rule your daily life. But that's also going to depend on the severity of the OCD and your ability to access and afford treatments. Some people may need long-term ongoing help and other and more intensive treatments. The two main treatments for OCD are psychotherapy and medications. Often, treatment is most effective with a combination of these two. What is Tourette syndrome? So Tourette syndrome, in its typical format, is a neurological disorder characterized by sudden, repetitive, rapid, and unwanted movements or vocal sounds that are referred to as tics or motor tics or vocal tics. It is really important to emphasize here that not everyone has typical Tourette syndrome. So you may see someone like they portray all the time on TV, they blurt out a lot, they swear, they have the facial and visual tics. But you can also have atypical Tourette's where you do not do any of those. You may have some body tics. There's not necessarily blurting or any of that. So you cannot define Tourette's simply as someone who blurts. And that is a huge failure in our system that has been drilled into the minds of many because of portrayals of Tourette's on television. Tourette is one of several disorders of the developing nervous system. Tics typically show up between the age of 2 and 15, with the average being around 6 years of age. Males tend to be 3 to 4 times more likely than females to develop Tourette. And the exact cause is not known, but there is a felt that there is a combination of both inherited and environmental factors. This is the second disorder this week that we're speaking about that have environmental factors. And anyone who thinks that our poor environment does not add to these disabilities and is not playing a role, you may need to do a little more study there. Back to Tourette's. Generally, the disorder involves repetitive movements or unwanted sounds that can't easily be controlled. However, with atypical Tourette's, you may not show either. Tics can range from mild to severe. Your self-esteem will suffer, often because of Tourette's. You're often embarrassed. You hesitate to engage in social activities. You don't want to go out on a date because you don't know how your body may respond, or even going out in public. As a result, you may be into risk of increased depression and even substance abuse. One piece of coping advice often shared with those with Tourette's, and this is usually typical Tourette's, not atypical, is to focus on the fact that tics tend to peak in their early 20s and then slowly improve. But if you're 14 and you've got to wait to your mid-20s, that's not helpful. What can be done? Again, no cure for Tourette's. Treatment is aimed at trying to control tics that interfere with everyday activities and functioning, but when you have atypical Tourette, there's very little that can be done.